time. Good morning. I'm so glad to be back here in Fort Myers. We've had quite an exciting time happening the last few weeks, and last weekend I was very privileged to go to the Salvation Army Camp Keystone in Stark, Florida, and it was great. I have to tell you that I came down to Florida in 1997. I have never been to Camp Keystone. There just was something going on every time. I didn't even get to drive kids up there, you know. So I got to go, and I was just overwhelmed how beautiful it was and everything, and I had a wonderful time. During the service, some of us will get to tell about how beautiful and wonderful it was, but anyways, this morning we're going to be doing Ezra chapter 7, and I wanted to let you know that I found some items that were from years ago where it talked about the time period. There's some maps, and there's also talking about the books of the Bible there. And so if anyone wants a copy, please just, send a message. You can either text message me or just, call the office. And I will make copies, and we'll try to send them out to you, or you can pick them up at the Salvation Army office. I'll leave her a copy that she can do it. And every week until I have enough for the next, the end of Ezra. So if you'd like copies of that, just to help your Bible study along, you're welcome to have some. So we learned about 2 weeks ago about how the Israelites overcame difficulties when they were building the temple of God in Jerusalem. And it was after they had finished it that they established the feasts that God had commanded them to observe when they first came into the promised land with Joshua. And so one would hope that the good life was coming. It was, but there were some details that still had to be ironed out first before that could take place. But as I was also going through my devotions, I have a devotional book that you can color. I like to color. And so it was the Psalms, and it was a gift. And I was doing this one section of Psalms, Psalm 119, and I was doing 11 to 48. And amazingly, I found out researching that Ezra is reputed to be the author of this Psalm 119. I was really surprised. And it would be very fitting because he was a priest and he was a teacher of the law and scriptures. So, I thought, and as he was, as this was being written, the words from 11 to 48 were, I read words like steadfast, love, salvation, word, rules, law, precepts, testimonies, commandments, statutes. I mean, that's so fitting of Ezra because it either talked about the love of God, the direction of God, how firm he was, a message from God, which was the scriptures, and the law. The law was described in many ways, like rules and precepts and commandments and statutes. And I said, wow, that, God just makes sure that we have what we need when we need it. And there it was. I was reading it, and I was also doing Ezra chapter 7 as well. And so in chapter 7, we're going to see some more details of how all this came about and what was going to be required of the people if they wanted to live again. In Ezra chapter 7, verse 1 through 5, I have these words. After these things, during the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra, son of Sariah, the son of Azariah, the son of Hilkiah, the son of Shallum, the son of Zadok, the son of Ahitub, the son of Amariah, the son of Azariah, the son of Meraioth, Meriah, the son of Zerahiah. I did practice these. The son of Uzzi. Thank you. The son of Buki, the son of Abishua, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, chief priest. This Ezra came up from Babylon. I went too far. Anyways, I was like, okay, how cool is this? That Ezra could trace his genealogy all the way back to the chief priest, Aaron. And as we know, when we go through some of the Bible, and this was something that when my husband was teaching the Bible, he pointed out that some of the people that we read about in the Bible actually knew someone else in the Bible because it was still the same generation, the same time frame. And it was like, wow, you know, he actually walked on the earth at the same time as so-and-so. And I'm like, wonder what it would have been like, you know, to sit there and listen to him say, you know, well, this is the way it should be. So you may recognize some of the names that I mentioned. For example, Phinehas was Aaron's grandson. He was a priest. Well, Phinehas killed a man who brought a heathen woman into his wife's tent during a time when Moab was enticing the Israelites to worship other gods. This is when they were in the desert. And, they had been told, do not go after what the countries around you are worshiping. And this guy had a family, but he went ahead and got another wife, and she was from Moab, and she worshiped other gods. This caused God to send a plague among the people. Well, his father was Eleazar, who was put in charge of all the priests and the duties. He became high priest after his father Aaron died in the mountain before they got to the promised land, because he had disobeyed God many years earlier. If you remember, Aaron was Moses' brother. He was the one that made the high priest in the desert. He was made high priest in the desert as the tribes were wandering around. And he also had been the spokesperson for Moses when they were in Egypt and had to go before the Pharaoh, because Moses kept saying, you know, I'm tongue-tied, I can't talk properly, I have a problem. Aaron, was the one who fashioned the golden calf that led the people of Israel into idolatry in the desert. And that also made them punished. And there's that famous line that Aaron said to Moses, oh, I threw the gold into the fire and this came out. I'm like, what? You know, I mean, today that sounds like, you know, somebody really trying to find excuses. Okay, number 1, Ezra 7, 6, and 7. Archie, Texas. Yeah, Artaxerxes. Okay, Ahasuerus, yeah. Yep, he was named 2 names. Well, Ezra was telling us how he came to Jerusalem and how he had the blessing of the king, King Ahasuerus, and that he arrived on the first day of the 5th month of the 7th year of King Ahasuerus. And he said it took him I figured it out, it took him 5 months to get there from Babylon all the way to Israel. And if we look at the map, of Babylon. You see, he had to go through mountains, and I think there was rivers and things like that. Well, Ezra carried with him a very special letter. It was a letter of introduction to the leaders and the elders who were already in Jerusalem. They may not have known Ezra, and so they would need something to tell them who he actually was. And many times in the centuries before, this is how people would get to know other people that are coming from a different country, a different town, and they would have a letter of introduction. Now we have the internet, we have telephones, we have telegrams, we have ID cards, we have fingerprints. Well, they didn't have stuff like that back then, so he had to carry a letter of introduction from the king. So it would have had the king's seal, and nobody else could. I mean, that was very, very important. No one else could use the king's seal unless he gave them permission. So if they saw that seal on the letter, they would know it came right from the king. So the king wanted to make sure that the people knew why he was going there and what he wanted Ezra to do. Number 2.
I issue a decree that all those of the people of Israel and the priests and Levites in my realm who volunteer to go up to Jerusalem may go with you. And whereas you are being sent by the king and his 7 counselors to inquire concerning Judah and Jerusalem with regard to the law of your God which is in your hand, and whereas you are to carry the silver and gold which the king and his counselors have freely offered to the God of Israel, whose dwelling is in Jerusalem, and whereas all the silver and gold that you may find in all the province of Babylon, along with the freewill offering of the people and the priests, are to be freely offered for the house of their God in Jerusalem.
So not only was he being introduced to the elders and the government officials there in Jerusalem, but he had been given a task of something to do. He had to go through, as he was traveling through Babylon, this might have been what was happening. As he traveled through, people from the various cities and areas were bringing their gold and their silver and their supplies, and that was adding to the caravan. So that might have been why it also took a little longer for him to get there, because he was getting all this stuff and organizing it. So the king said, anyone else who wants to come to Jerusalem that is an Israelite, you can go. So he was giving permission for people that had not gone the first time to come and to live in Jerusalem and in Israel again. And he sent money and supplies to Jerusalem. This was in addition to what they had already brought the first time around. And then he told them that what they had to use the money for, it was very detailed. He told them also how much gold and silver, how much silver and other supplies he had brought. For example, it says there in chapter 7 that he had 100 talents of silver. Now, me wanting to know what things are, I had to go back through, and I'm looking through all this stuff and find out 100 talents of silver, you ready for this, is equal to 3 3/4 tons of silver. 3 3/4 tons. I'm like, wow, I don't think Fort Knox might even hold that much silver, you know? That's a lot of silver. And the thing is, people would have known he was traveling to Jerusalem with this silver, that he could have been killed within the first 2 or 3 days, you know, through the mountains or whatever. God really put a special bubble around him to keep him going and keep him safe. Okay, the next thing was, sorry about that, 100 cores, C-O-R-S, 100 cores of wheat. Now, the thing is that with flour and with wheat, you want to make sure that you're going to get there in time so it's not all rotted. But apparently it worked, for 5 months that wheat sat in the sacks and it didn't rot and it was there. So 100 cores, 600 bushels. That's how much 100 cores was, 600 bushels. Well, that wasn't all. Then he had to send some wine because they used wine in the sacrifices, and the priests used wine in their meals because the priests didn't work. So they had to depend on the people of Jerusalem to give them their pay, to give them enough food to live. So they sent the wine. Okay, 100 baths of wine. Now, we all know, I'm thinking, a bathtub? Is this a bathtub? And I'm thinking, okay, some bathtubs are really narrow. Some are really wide, Exactly, It was 100 baths of wine is equal to 600 gallons of wine. So that's what he sent. And then he also sent 100 baths of olive oil because, of course, they had to use oil not just in cooking but also in their sacrifices as well. And so that was another 600 gallons. So that all would have been enough to be distributed through the year to the priests and the other servants that came to work in the temple. So King Ahasuerus, we'll use that word, wanted to make sure that the people prayed for his successful reign and the safety of his family. He said that, he said that he wanted them to do it. So he emphasized it again in the letter that he sent with Ezra. You must pray for the king and his family, the king and his sons. You've got to pray for them to make sure they're safe. Well, he was emphasizing that he chose to set them free against everybody's wishes, that the people around him did not. If you remember all those letters that went to him, he's saying, no, I believe that God wants your people to be free, and I'm letting you go, that kind of thing. Well, he also believed that God was watching and protecting the people of Israel. He wanted to be on their good side. He wanted to be on the good side of God. So that's why he said, pray. Make sure they pray, I want to be safe. I want to, Lord, make this a check mark in my history. I did this, so, it'll be okay. Who has number 3?
Whatever the God of heaven has prescribed, let it be done with diligence. For the temple of the God of heaven, why should his wrath fall in the realm of the king of his sons? You also know that you have no authority to impose taxes, tribute, or duty on any of these priests, Levites, or musicians, gatekeepers, temple servants, or other workers of this house of God. And you, Ezra, in accordance with the wisdom of your God, which you possess, appoint magistrates and judges to administer justice to all the people of Trans-Euphrates, all who know the laws of God, and you are to teach anyone who does not know them. Whoever does not obey the law of your God and the law of the king must surely be punished by death, banishment, confiscation of property, and imprisonment.
Wow, that was a really huge command. He was decreeing that Ezra was to teach the law to not only all the Israelites, but all the people all over the Trans-Euphrates area. And this was a huge job. So to help him do it, he had to appoint magistrates and judges to administer the laws. So he would teach them to teach the people, this is what you have to do to follow God's law in this area. And he had proved himself worthy back in Babylon by his own study and by his life, and that's why the king chose him to do that. Well, this will happen to us as we study and as we pray and as we obey God's laws, God's commandments. People are going to come to us for advice. We're going to get responsibility because Jesus is guiding and shining throughout our lives. So Ezra then ends this chapter with thankfulness and praise to God. This is a good time because we're just starting to go into our thankful time of year. And so here we are. He's ending the chapter with thankfulness and praise to God. He says that God gave him the courage to take on the job of administration and teaching. And so we may feel afraid and we may feel not capable of doing a task that God has given us to do. And, but there's an old saying in the Salvation Army, whom, my Englishness is forgotten, whomever God calls, he equips. He's ready to give us the tools that we need to work for him. So we need to please ask, pray, ask him to give us what is needed, and allow him then to equip you and open the door to that job that he's calling you to do, whatever that job happens to be. And one of the wonderful things that we saw last weekend was the young adults were there as well as the older ones that were here for the Brangle. But there was also a call to officership, and there was also a call to soldiership and to local officership, So that's what Ezra is telling us. He was called to be an officer, in modern terms, that's what he was. He was a priest, but he was also a teacher. So God was also calling him to teach other people. God may be calling you today to do something for him. Pray about it. Let him speak to your heart, and then search the scriptures to find out what it is he wants you to do. It was good seeing all of you today. Have a blessed week.